wanted to emphasize that both the climate and the higher education crisis are linked, and that our struggles and goals are really shared. So that's what I just for 5 minutes wanted to talk about before we then move on to the actual event. So academia today is characterized really by a sort of a combination of long-standing values and practices, such as the idea of objectivity or distance, the whole idea of viva contemplativa, and also part of that sort of hierarchies and inequalities along race, gender and class lines within departments. But that nowadays is really combined with the corporate values and people and practices that the marketization of the last few decades has brought with it. So nowadays we have a whole sort of reliance on corporate funding, this whole emphasis on impact, and of course, most importantly, a huge inflation of senior management, and concurrent with that, a real massive devaluing of academic staff and all the sort of manifestations of that, reduced salaries, pensions, forced redundancies, rising precarity, and massive workloads, and reinforcing this, and all this is reinforcing existing inequalities as well. And all this is not only made life for academics pretty unbearable, it also means, and is a really contributing factor to making higher education really not fit for addressing the climate emergency. I just want to say a few things about that. So firstly, as Charlie Gardner said in a recent Science Rebellion talk, he sort of put it really well, that the academic process is too slow and too disengaged and also too neutral, or sometimes, of course, even worse than neutral, directly tied to capital interests. And then things like engagement or impact are often really geared towards money and not towards activism or critique in any way. And then at an individual level, as well as the academics that are, like so many, are really too stressed and too overworked and insecure to engage with activism, there are also those who are really too focused on their own careers and who themselves embody really this sort of neoliberal individualism and competition. And all these factors mean that it's really that none of these factors are conducive to really addressing the climate emergency. So what we really need is a sort of complete radical reform that addresses all these issues and that cares for the well-being of staff as well as addressing the climate emergency. And I just wanted to say that it's really important to always keep both of those in mind. I'm saying this because at Goldsmiths, where I am, we now actually have, or are about to launch, a Green New Deal, which really centers climate and ecology things, and which in many ways is, or sounds and is good, but this is happening in a context of really sort of several waves of more and more redundancies, and now we're hitting forced redundancies, and many of my colleagues see this program really as just another sort of excuse to actually get rid of more people. So it's actually that sort of vision, that sort of center on climate emergency is not at all what we would want to see, both for people's sake, but also because actually just studying ecology as in itself is not actually the way forward necessarily. And so given that there is now already, if you like, a sort of neoliberal co-option of the climate emergency agenda itself, it is really important that we keep on imagining and thinking about the kind of university that we do want and that kind of addresses all the issues that we are concerned with. Having said that, I am also really aware, as we all are, that this is an incredibly difficult task, and especially given all the sort of intersecting institutions and structures set against this. So just to mention, I mean, obviously our current government, the financialization and regulatory framework of higher education, the caliber of the people who are in senior management at the moment, the complete lack of democracy in universities. I mean, there's no accountability towards actual academic staff by senior management. All these things make any real change extremely difficult, as we all know. So, but it's nevertheless important to keep on imagining what we want, and also to think about what we can do even in these difficult circumstances. So I just wanted to say 4 brief thoughts I had on this, but I hope we can discuss this together and keep on the conversation in this event and later as well. So first of all, to acknowledge that the UCU strike itself is an absolutely key important battle against all these forces, and that sort of are really does not just sort of impeding our own lives, but also really destroying higher education as a whole and making addressing the climate emergency really difficult. So it's really, you can really see the UCU strike as climate action in itself, because that is a key thing that we're battling here. And it's also possible to think about maybe alternative universities like the Faculty for Future initiative that some of you may have heard of, or other similar ones. I'm not sure whether that's necessarily the way forward, but it's something to think about. And then thirdly, of course, as social scientists, we really, as many of us already do, but we need to keep on analyzing higher education itself as a key system that intersects with other systems and institutions that prevent change. And of course, this is what we do, like structures and agency, and that's sort of really to look at higher education itself and identify ways of leverage points, if you like, where we can make changes. And then last but not least, it's also important maybe to recognize this sort of potentially empowering impact of the no more goodwill that's been sort of a sort of slogan that's been circulating recently. And this is for those of you who are perhaps not in the UK context. Last week, the UK unanimously rejected UCU proposals for pensions, which was an extreme blow to the whole strike at the moment, and has left many of us angrier and more disillusioned than ever. And in that context, there's now a whole campaign of saying no more goodwill, that you withdraw any extra labour, which of course higher education, as we all know, completely depends on, and that you don't bend over backwards to work for institutions that clearly don't love you back, basically. So in that context, I think, I feel this sort of no more goodwill is actually really important and something we should collectively talk about in and of itself a lot more. But it can also be taken further as a sort of, if you like, subversion. And I'm personally more and more interested in subversion as a form of, actually maybe Stellan, you have more to say about this. I'm completely new to this, but as a form of resistance. And I think that in itself has, that if you use your position that you're in to maybe have for different aims, and that in itself can collectively, if everyone sort of, no one buys into the system anymore, that can also be quite powerful. So in that context, of course, if you withdraw any extra labour and if you're willing to subvert, then maybe activism is after all possible for academics. And on that note, I do want to now introduce our speakers, who are going to be talking about activism itself a little bit more. So I'll just introduce in alphabetical order. First of all, we're very happy to have Gail Bradbrook. I have short biographies which I will read out about each of you before opening up the discussion. So Gail Bradbrook has been researching, planning and training for mass civil disobedience since 2010 and is one of the co-founders of Extinction Rebellion. Gail has been arrested 5 times for acts of civil disobedience, including last year at Barclays Bank in Stroud for breaking their window, and subsequently had her home raided for intending to cause loss and disruption to financial institutions. For these actions, she faces a potential jail sentence of up to 10 years. Gail is a mother of 2 boys, aged 13 and 16, and has trained in molecular biophysics. And then Sara, Sara is over there. Sara Vestergren is a social, political, and environmental psychologist. Her research interests are collective action and the environmental movement, and more specifically, participation in collective action. Her studies have, amongst other things, emphasized the benefits of protesting, and she has, together with Professor John Jury, developed a theory of emergent and enduring change through participation in collective action. She also has a lifelong engagement in various organizations and movements focused on social change. And finally, we have Stellan Vinthagen is here as well. And Stellan is Professor of Sociology and a scholar activist, and the inaugural endowed chair in the study of nonviolent direct action and civil resistance at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. His research is focused on resistance, power and social movements, and nonviolent action and social change. And he has since 1980 been an educator, organizer and activist in several countries, and has participated in more than 30 non-violent civil disobedient actions. for which he has served a total of more than 1 year in prison. One of his books is A Theory of Nonviolent Action, How Civil Resistance Works. Great. So then let's start. We will run this by having each of the speakers speak for maybe 5-10 minutes, and then after that we will have a more open discussion between us, and then also inviting other people to join us. So Gail, would you like to start? What role can social scientists play in climate activism?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really, really, really glad this is happening. I'm sort of wondering why this didn't happen sooner, actually. We've had our scientist groups for a long time, and we can obviously think of the climate and ecological crisis through the lens of science. And we had to do that because of the vicious and ridiculous and nasty denial of the basics of climate science. So it was important to have our scientists alongside us. But as I'm sure we all know, this is not a problem of physics or ecology. This is an issue of humanity and human beings' separation from our better selves, from nature, and the way we're choosing to organise, and how our sense of disempowerment. And the way this crisis will play out will have sort of second and third order effects, and that needs far more stronger communication, in my opinion. This is not obviously about the weather changing, it's about what that means to food systems, and what happens when food prices go up, and what happens to societies and even civilizations when you have so many multiple pressures. And that's the domain of social science, and we need a strong voice on that. It's so important to have experts who've got letters after their name, before their name, to say these things, because if you talk about collapse as an activist, you could get laughed down. I remember one of the first interviews I did on the radio as we launched XR, and I said, I will be fighting over tins of beans soon, and they laughed. And then the COVID crisis hit, and I was wrong. It was toilet paper that was being fought over, right? I think it would be interesting if people are studying social science and thinking where to go, that my understanding, obviously I'm here with a background in physical sciences, but the discipline of collapsology, my understanding is that's very much more based in sort of French francophone countries. We need more people thinking and understanding and knowing about that area. I think also, as you've been talking about with the strike, we have this key issue of our economic system, and many of our best economists get removed from the economics department and shoved into a different department because they're so-called heterodox economists, because they're not in the neoclassical tradition, despite all the nonsense. And I could really wax lyrical about the problem in economics. And I think that some of the strikes and some of the focus of the degradation of academia should be focused on your economics departments, right? Go and occupy the fuck out of them. Like, they're teaching terrible nonsense, frankly. Like, okay, I'm going to stop on that one. We can go there with questions if we want. I'm also sitting with a degree of frustration around the setting of strategy, at least from an XR UK perspective, and our sort of lack of engagement with social sciences and wider, Stellan's work included, Sara's work really important. You know, I'm sitting myself with this question of what is our role now as a social movement when we have raised the alarm? We're not in the same place as we were 3 years ago. Why are we just constantly thinking this is all about getting people on the streets, when we know that social movements are about so much more, and you have to grow your strength before you tickle the nose of the tiger? Otherwise, they're going to sort of swipe you back and you won't have the strength to respond, in my opinion, right? So how are we supposed to be in dialogue, and in particular in dialogue with the public? What are the opportunities? What should we be saying in these times? What does social psychology tell us about the barriers that the public are facing? Presumably a lot of that's about agency, presumably a lot of that is about thinking about direct action, not just in terms of what we stop and how we manifest a civil disobedience, but what we say yes to, and the sort of positive agency that you can bring from doing things. So as an example, last night, I was with rewilders from across the UK, and including with the very brilliant Mary Reynolds, whose work is on the ARC, Acts of Random Kindness for the Earth, where she encourages people to give up. She was a gardener who won the Chelsea Flower Show, right? But she sort of got a downer on gardeners and thinks we should become guardians instead. And that's the thing that can happen across our lands, is letting nature have parts of itself back. And I'm not suggesting that's the whole strategy now or anything like that, but as a thing that groups can focus on as a positive action, as a way of having a dialogue about nature, as a way of having a dialogue about geoengineering. I'm just giving as an example of how I think we need to think a lot more broadly about the times we're in. And so maybe to finish, to say that what I think I see is that we don't ask deep enough questions. People may have come across the sort of 5 whys, and my understanding of the best forms of science asks really good questions and asks the question underneath that question and so on. Why are we in this crisis, and why again? And whatever answer you first give, ask the next why. Why is it like that? And the deeper we ask ourselves why we're at where we're at, that we will come up with much richer answers to how we move forwards together. So feeling the connection of all the struggles now, my sense is that so many people in the world are ready for so much change. Like, how can we not harness that energy? We need to think well together, and social scientists are the place where that level of thinking's happening. So we really need you folks. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. There's so much here already that I think I really look forward to discussing in the broader group. Thank you so much. That was really great to hear your perspective as the founder of XR actually on this. Thank you. Sara, would you like to go next then, please?
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you, Gail, for emphasizing the need for social science, because I might be biased as a social scientist, but I do think that we are hugely needed, and I think we can make a huge contribution, because what's not social about the climate crisis? You know, it's people together that have created the issue, and it's people together that's going to need to solve the issue. So of course we're going to need social science. But I think we also, as Pauline said earlier, we have a huge hurdle at the moment, especially in certain countries where the university employers are actually working against us in our fight to save the world, or at least, you know, try to fight the climate crisis. So rather than being part of the solutions, our university employers are actually a direct part of the problem at the moment. And that's a big issue, because one, if you want to be an activist, or at least take action, because of course being an activist is not just being on the streets and shouting or gluing yourself to buildings or smashing windows, it's so much more. But by university employers and having precarity, cauterization, people don't really dare to speak up, people don't dare to act, because not everyone can afford to not have a job tomorrow. Not everyone can afford to go to prison. And our university employees could be part of the solution there, and could help us foster a better platform for academic freedom, because let's be honest, we're going to need research going forward. We're going to need science to help us out of the crisis, and we're going to need people to help us out of the crisis. But unfortunately, that's not the situation everywhere at the moment. However, as a social psychologist, of course, I focus on how people act and think and feel in social situations. So I do think that we, can have a huge contribution in, for example, how to get people to adapt to certain situations, how to get people to act collectively, how can we get people to make the right decisions, whatever those are in each situation. And we need social science for this. And I think this is where our biggest contribution lies. How to help other people help the world. So yeah, I hope we can get into that, but also I hope we can talk a bit more about different types of actions. So I mainly focus on protests, so collective actions, which of course can be individual actions, but see yourself as a part of a group member while taking that action. But also how effective that is for your own benefit, for example, your own well-being, but also how effective it is in raising awareness. But as Gail said, we need to also move beyond that. So we've come quite far in raising awareness. So what do we do now? So the majority, I would say, at least in the West world, now knows that we're in a shitty situation and we need to get out of this, and we need to get out of this fast. So we have raised the awareness, but where do we go next and how can we help with that? And Stellan might know some good actions that we could focus on.
So, Sara, were you asking Stellan a question there, or I just?
Yeah, I just thought it was a good place for him to move on.
Yeah.
I was trying to bridge.
Ah, okay. No, you did that very well. I'm sorry, I was a bit slow to facilitate.
Should I jump in there then? Okay, great. Yeah, so I wrote an article 10 years ago that is suggesting a social scientist panel on climate change, because I was thinking that the problem with climate and the crisis is not anymore technology or ecology or anything like that. It has all to do with dominant power, particularly fossil industries. And therefore, we need a social scientist panel that is looking at what can we do in order to really be effective in creating social change. So my starting point is that I think that Extinction Rebellion is having a very promising approach, one that is building on research within social science, particularly the importance of disruptive actions in order to pressure governments to act. But I see some problems with parts of the strategy and tactics, where I find that mostly the disruptive protests that are not so proactive and constructive in the direct action approach, that doesn't combine resistance and building alternatives in the way I think is more promising. I'll get back to that, but that's kind of my starting here. So I think firstly, it's important to be clear that we do have, since the last kind of 10 years or something, really clear research that is showing the power of the people that rebel in the way that Extinction Rebellion is doing. For those of you that are about my age, you would remember that people that believed in radical social change advocated and suggested that it's only armed rebellion that can really create a radical change in society. But actually the research has shown that non-violent massive participation of disobedience and disruptive protest is actually double as effective, even against militarized authoritarian regimes. So we can clearly say that Extinction Rebellion is approaching the challenge of climate crisis in the right way. So that's really important to begin with. It's also shown that disruptive politics, disruptive actions are much more effective than the conventional kind of legal marches in the capital when people march from point A to B and demand their slogans. So disruptive actions in itself is putting much more of a pressure even on a liberal democracy to actually act. And I think we need to be clear that if you're engaged in the climate justice movement, you're up against some of the most powerful interests in the world that is connected to the world capitalist system and its energy systems. So the way that the state and that world capitalism is wedded into the interests of the fossil industry is absolutely fundamental. And therefore, any kind of climate justice movement that is trying to do something about this needs to address these kind of fundamental power relations. But that's also why I find it problematic when we have a movement like Extinction Rebellion that is mostly focused on the power of protest in the way of politics of demand, putting a pressure on the government to fix the problem for us, right? We already know, all of us that are engaged in these issues, that the governments of the world, they're not really very keen, they're not very active, they're not really taking it serious. So then, obviously, it kind of makes sense to put the pressure on them to really make something here. But the problem with protest, when you're turning your demands toward the government, is that there exists a trap, a kind of a double bind with protest politics. And that is that if you win and you get the government to make some changes, you only show that the government is reasonable and they are listening to the people. So you strengthen the power of the government. If you fail, you only show that the people is not strong enough and the government is much stronger. So there is a double bind in protest, which is really problematic, which I think goes against our more fundamental need of change of the political economy of our societies. So what I'm suggesting instead is a focus much more on direct action, a much more focus on that we fix the problems ourselves. If you look historically, it's very clear that it's never been the states, it's never been the corporations that created fundamental changes in our society, that created religion of freedom or freedom of speech or the right to strike or the right to vote or anything of these kind of fundamental changes in society. Has always been a result of pressures from disobedient masses of people organized in social movements. And there are no reasons to believe that it will be different now. It's going to be the same. So I think rather that a more powerful mean of acting is to go through direct action. So what I mean then is that we can, for example, create, instead of demanding that the state is doing a citizens' assembly, we can create a citizen assembly ourselves. And when the citizen assembly is coming with a recommendation, you need to do these kind of 20 different important changes in society in order to deal with the climate crisis. Then we act on these. as a movement, we act on those. We close the coal mines. We close the airports. So we take it step by step, and then it's the government that needs to protest against us instead of we trying to protest against the government. So it's a whole other game of politics. Obviously, this is also working in the way of putting a pressure on governments and corporations. I just think that it puts a much greater pressure, and it creates more of an empowerment of people. And here I'm inspired by Extinction Rebellion and the Gelände in Germany, where I took part in actions where we were 2,000 people closing the coal mine, the biggest coal mine in Europe, for several days. So this is possible, and it's something we can do, but we need to adopt such a strategy in order to do that then. So what I'm thinking is creative short-term focus campaigns within long-term social change movements. So part of the weakness with Extinction Rebellion is that we need to recognize that even if the three main demands, or the four, or whatever it is now, is being implemented, it's not going to be enough. So what we need to is connecting it to a more fundamental social change of our society, the whole political economy. So therefore, we need also broader visions of a different society. And here I'm taking a lot of inspiration from the landless workers in Brazil, the MST, and the Zapatistas in southern Mexico, that are not waiting for the government to create stuff. They are creating it themselves. If they need food, they occupy land and they grow food. But when they occupy land and grow food, and in the MST in Brazil, they also do it ecologically. They also create their own self-governance in these occupied territories. So in a way, they create a new model of a different Brazil on the occupied land. So it becomes like a direct action approach to how you do stuff. And I'm involved right now in a book that is terming this constructive resistance. So it's like the idea that you, in the same way as Naomi Klein is saying, it's not enough to say no, we also need to say yes. But the really powerful thing is when we combine the yes and the no in the same kind of work. And when you occupy land, you resist the land distribution at the same time as you create the yes, the alternative of a different world. When you create a citizen assembly yourself, you're already taking over the power of the state. When you're closing the coal mines, you're already taking over the responsibility of the climate crisis. So it's a matter of empowering people, not just demanding that the state is fixing the problem for us. That is basically my proposal, and I want to underline that I think Extinction Rebellion is a beautiful example in taking social science serious, and is understanding that disruptive, massive protest is the way forward. I totally agree with these two things. I just think that the strategy needs to be improved in order to be really empowering and not fundamentally trying to turn towards the state and say, please fix the problem for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Stellan, apologies, I cut out a little bit in between, but I think I got the most of it. We would like to keep this as a dialogue, so I would like to invite now Sara, maybe especially because I think you handed over sort of before I could respond to yours as well, and Gail, but just, well, maybe Gail now, if you would like to respond what Stellan was just saying about the particular point XR is at the moment. Then
yeah, I agree. I agree. I think the only thing I would want to, well, there's probably a few things to add, and ideas and thoughts, is that I don't know if really we have a basis for understanding the change right now, because in my humble opinion, I think we're trying to shift a paradigm, a power over paradigm. And so you have parts of the world that succeed for some time to resist or to set up an alternative or to get a different form of government in. And then the machinery of the power over paradigm, call it patriarchy, white supremacy, whatever you want to call it, it then finds a way to squash that resistance, move somewhere else, go somewhere else. And I think that humanity is trying to work out right now how to shift a paradigm. And I don't think that is, my understanding of shifting paradigms is that the paradigm that exists needs to be held within the next thing that comes forwards. And some of that is literally manifest in the human body. It's that, the brilliant work of Ian McGilchrist and Jill Balty-Taylor on the nature of the human brain, the left hemisphere being the hemisphere of distress and stress in some ways, the sympathetic nervous system, also on the detail, abstracting and mechanizing the world. And that's taken over, and it's taken over exactly how we educate our children, unless they're sort of doing Montessori or Steiner education. We've had reviews of education systems and said, stop doing this to our kids. 27 papers in the Cambridge Review, and yeah, it carries on, right? The right brain is the connected brain. And another way of calling it, my colleague Skeena calls it the whiteness blindness. We're in so often in this part of our head, and that's the one that always wants the action. And where is the vision and where is the connection? And so with some XR colleagues, we're starting a network called the Being the Change Affinity Network for just that reason. And I think it has to be global, because this isn't about national governments. I mean, capital is international. The paradigm is international. It's not in all places, though. It's not got the grips in all places. And the places where the extraction takes place, where the taps are most extracting, is largely, as we know, in the global south. It's not just. And I think part of the issue of whiteness is that we have an opt-out. I feel it myself, like I'm sort of in here, I'm willing, and then actually, I don't have to step forwards. And there are other people like the Maasai right now are having their lands removed from them, being evicted, who have no, that is a genocide, it is the end of their civilization, and they will fight. And where are we, really? Because what this paradigm does is to disconnect us from each other. And so, what our thinking in the Being the Change Affinity Network is something around twinning with other struggles very deeply at sort of fractal layers. So certain towns twinning with certain other towns across the world, because we have to bring the human family back together again. That is the, in that way, Sara, I'd be really interested in your thoughts on this about communicating. So I'm a bit of a nerd, all right, that's like a good spreadsheet and a good theory, but that's not how we're going to talk to people about it. But the sort of concept of Wetiko or Windingo or Urugu or the hungry ghost, that what happens to the human spirit when it gets gripped with a sort of scarcity mentality, that the enemy is both within and, showing up, it's taken over our systems. And so maybe just to finish by saying, I had a recent conversation with someone who's had been very senior in a bank, and they get why we're doing it, but they're not speaking out, And I'm saying the emperor's got no clothes on. People know that this system is killing us, and we need to start a process of saying we want to be the change. And I think there's something really moving and meaningful about making an oath to the world and being seen to do that. And part of that oath is not being part of the opt-out, and that we will have our own version of where we're being the change, whether it is focusing on a rewilding project or it is about bringing new forms of democracy forwards. And I have a proposal about that as well. But we would be linked, and we would be supporting each other in a much bigger way. And of course, Web 3.0 technologies help us do that. So I think it's really exciting times, and I'm very interested in this concept of paradigm shift, and how we which levers are the important ones to pull globally, and how we act as a collective body to focus on those levers when we can really see and feel each other and know that, you know, my life is absolutely dependent on yours. There isn't an opt-out. Thank you.
I think that's really interesting, and I think it's really important, the connecting us. And I think we need to find a way to make an us a sustainable us, not just us as humans, right? And we have, in this paradigm shift, we're also up against a huge power at the moment. Never before has so many climate activists been arrested, killed, you know, assassinated. And I mean, just look in the UK, right? So we have the new policing bill coming up that will basically make all the things that we've talked about illegal. I, as an immigrant, would get deported. Not the end of the world. I would get deported to Sweden. You know, it could be worse. But for some people, that can't even be an option. The same as for some people, facing 10 years in prison is not an option. So we also need to consider the privilege. I mean, I consider myself super privileged, having grown up in Sweden, being raised to have a voice, being raised to be seen, being allowed to speak up and, you know, make my own space. But very few countries work like that. And a lot of the countries we need to connect with also have a context where if you speak up, you may not be there the next day. And there are lots of organizations, I think human rights organizations, that we should team up with, that, you know, need our help and we need their help in keeping people safe, so we can create an us that is more motivated than just us as humans. And to do that, obviously we need the dialogue, and we need a global dialogue. Organizations and groups like XR, you know, it's fantastic because we have the communication network, right? So we are, you know, we can create an us, for example, an XR us. But we need to find ways that also, like Stellan was talking about, you know, that empower people. Because if we're going to achieve anything, we need people to be empowered. We need people to think that shit, what we're doing can actually, you know, achieve something. Because if people don't think that we can achieve anything, there won't be any motivation to act. So I think we need to, which is of course really difficult because it's going to be slightly different in different contexts as well. But we need to focus on how to empower people to make informed decisions, how to empower people to act and create these networks. I don't have all the solutions, but I think we need to be part of the solution, and we need to make the solution a collective solution rather than individual technology.
Thank you, Sara. I have quite a lot of thoughts and responses myself. But Stellan, did you want to come in again at this point and then?
Yes, sure. We are very much in agreement of the need for a paradigm shift and the need for creating movements and strategies that are empowering people. The person behind me, Gandhi, suggested that there are three important elements in doing that, and I think it's still true. You need to resist the violence and oppression and exploitation of the system that exists now. That's number one. Number two is you need to create alternative systems that are different. Number three, you need to work on personal transformation because you are also part of the problem. You have been formed and grown up in the system. So that speaks to the privilege that Sara is mentioning. And I think that's absolutely true. we are in a situation not just of a climate crisis, but a fundamental social crisis, where our societies are created in such a way that it's actually destroying the planet. So the problem is much bigger than just climate politics. Obviously, people in XR knows this, but I don't find that the strategy is really reflecting that. So the moment when we are turning towards the state or the corporations to fix the problems, the transition movement is trying to turn towards corporations, and XR is turning towards the state to fix the problems. I think we're misguided. We need to do the solutions ourselves in such a way that sometimes it's legal what we do, sometimes it's illegal, and we will meet repression. But then the state need to protest against us instead. So I think that there are reasons to look back into historical social change, how, for example, capitalism grew up 500 years ago. It were people that created early banks and trading that with time grow into an independent system. And I think we can do the same, but then we need to create the solutions within the movements. And we need to kind of obstruct those fossil industries that are benefiting from continuing the system in the way it is. And I want to throw in another thing, and that is that I think that academia and social scientists are definitely part of the solution, but I think we have so much problems, as is visible through the academic strike going on in the UK right now, and the new public management, the neoliberal kind of university that we all know so much about. So there's a long historical tradition of how social science has been exploitative in the same way as mining industries, trying to extract information from communities and then go back and publish articles that no one has access to, and then you build your individual career from that. So I think what is needed is not academia or social scientists, but it's the dialogue and the bridges between what I call the professors of the street, experienced activists, together with engaged social scientists. And if we can form more equal collaborations between those kinds of people, we can build a knowledge that is pragmatic enough, that is long-term enough, that is social change oriented enough to deal with the fundamental needs that we are standing in front of. I don't think it's enough with relying on activists that are all the time being pressured by being imprisoned, fined, or ridiculed or whatever, and academics that are kind of caught up into a system that is fundamentally colonial. So in my view, we need to develop whole other ways of collaboration. And I've been trying to do that within the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. I work together with Black liberation groups from the 1960s and the Black Lives Matter, together with the Red Power period of the Native Americans and the Standing Rock, in creating dialogues where the professors of the street, the experienced activists, are developing the research questions that should guide the social scientists in what they're trying to do, and building networks of knowledge together. So that's what I mean with a social scientist panel for a climate change, which is really what we need. So a whole other approach to knowledge, I'm suggesting.
Thank you so much. And that really resonates with a lot of things I've been thinking about. And in fact, what I'm finding really striking here, that activism, what is emerging so clearly from what you are all saying, and sort of embodying is that activism really isn't just one thing, that it's not just protest on the street, but can be all sorts of different things, including much more, and that we keep on searching for better or meaningful ways of acting and thinking all the time as well. I mean, all this thinking that I can see so clearly, you and all the people who are putting in questions, that is in itself also activism, to all the time reflect and take the social sciences, take reading on board, and then put it into practice, and then reflect on the practice and take it back. But yes, what you were saying, Stellan, just at the end there, and what I just wanted to pick up on Gail's point at the very beginning, actually, what you were saying about economics, that maybe one form of activism that we can focus on just now in the sort of last 10 minutes is really the transformation, or what to do within the social sciences themselves, and specifically then in each one of these, because they are of course not the same, as we all know. Like, well, I'm in anthropology. Anthropology itself has many different kinds of anthropology, so I'm sure that that applies clearly to all social sciences, but that we really think about both what kind of needs to be done, like, and that is, I agree totally, a much more outward looking, a much more but then of course what kind of outward looking, but to really rethink the heart of academia and all its colonial and exploitative legacies and ongoing involvements, and then to really practically imply and keep on having all these conversations. So maybe just now we can just again maybe talk a little bit more about what you would like to see XR social scientists should be doing going forward. I mean, we had been talking about writing something about what each discipline could do, but we are very interested in what you would suggest at this stage. Gail, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to mention one of the actions that we designed. I started a team within XR called Money Rebellion, which was to look at the economic system and to bring that piece in. I mean, it might be worth saying to people that XR was a project of something called Rising Up, and Rising Up had a sort of bigger vision and picture of how the world was, and it had been called Compassionate Revolution. You know, it's like that there are many different components that need to come together. Just let me share a particular action that we did that I think would be easier for academics to participate in. And while you're occupying the economics department, if you like, but so some of us took out credit cards with Barclays Bank, and we gave, with permission, made a donation on the credit cards to Survival International. And then we told Barclays Bank that we were repairing the harm that they'd done. There's a really beautiful video about it, led by a GP called Sara. She managed to get £3,500 on hers. They only gave me 70 quid. Obviously, it trashes your credit rating, so that needs to be a thing that you can live with. But there's something about, you know, it's a very sort of simple online vision in action thing, but within that is the conversation about what is money. You know, money is just a made up thing. Like, they created that money at that time. So when I was getting interviewed by the police, I had to raid my house about it, because it's very threatening to capital that we might do things like that, right? So that was the thing that got me raided, and the window breaking. But let's have the, you know, they're saying, well, you know, you've taken their money. It was, no, they just made their money up at the time. They just typed it in. It didn't exist before, right? And so you can have that conversation, and the fact that they're incentivized as a bank to harm, like that. So you're having the conversation about both what they're spending money on, but also what the system is driving them to do. I just thought I'd share that action because I think it's quite cute, and I think it's only a handful of us that tried it out. If it's a small amount of money, by the way, in my live experience right now, nobody's going to come knocking at the door, because they sell on the debt after some time to some, and they sort of hassle you for ages, but they're not going to come to your door. It's not worth the money. Do you see what I mean? So we want loads and loads of people taking up an action like that. There you go. That's the thing you could do.
That's great. Thank you. We shall try that. So Sara or Stellan, do you have any more thoughts on what you think XR social scientists could or should be focusing on, or on different disciplines as well? Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I'm not allowed to have a credit card because I'm an immigrant. So sorry, I can't participate in that. But I think as a whole science, I think we need to be louder. I think we need to be more out there. I mean, just look at the Don't Look Up movie. You know, we're not even in there. Look at the COVID pandemic. We had to fight our way in there. I think that we are too quiet and we're too soft. I think we need to be more outspoken. We need to engage more with the public. I don't think there's a lot of point trying too much to engage with the government, because I mean, social science is always exposing issues with the system, always exposing issues with the elite, with capital and so forth. So, you know, we rarely get a lot of sympathies. But I do think that we need to talk more publicly, and we need to be seen more. And I can only, you know, speak for social psychologists. And I think, even though I'm biased, I think we can contribute a lot, but I do think that we are too quiet, and I think we need to speak up. But also, you know, I appreciate that it's dangerous, and we could, of course, you know, these publishers that we publish our research papers with that are in bed with the fossil fuel industry, we could just refuse to publish with them, but that hurts our careers. You know, we don't get promoted. We don't, you know, we have to be referable because in the research excellence framework. So I think there's lots of things we can do. It's just a question of if we're prepared to do them. And I think the more people we can gather that are prepared to do them, that are prepared to call out big publishing houses, you know, I do think that we can make a change.
Yeah, obviously, we academics need to take a whole other kind of responsibility, especially social scientists, since this is really a matter of social science. But a couple of ideas. One is that I think tenured faculty like myself need to take the risks. We need to understand that people that are adjuncts or people that have unsecure and precarious situations cannot really challenge the system in the same way. So there's really a responsibility for tenured faculty to do that. That's one thing. Another thing is that I think really we need to develop models. We need to find other models of how we collaborate, because social scientists tend to be very within our own discourse, which is hard to understand for activists, and it often deals with issues that are not so relevant. And then activists are preoccupied with surviving for the next day and all that. So it's there's a gap here, and we need to take it serious, particularly since several people have pointed out there's this historical tradition of very exploitative and colonial science. We need to break with that. But there are a lot of people that have tried this with action research, indigenous research methodology, and so on, that we can draw on. So it's not like we have to begin from the beginning. A lot of people have already done it. But I think that's where the climate justice movement needs to collaborate with social scientists, or vice versa, to build on that.
Could I just add one more thing? I mean, thank you. I mean, we've just had the IPCC report 2 out, and my understanding is report 3 will come later on in the year, and that's where social scientists get a say. Stroke, let's be honest, fuck it up, because it's the policymakers and it's the economists And people may well know that there was a Nobel Prize, it's not a real Nobel Prize in actual fact, given to an economist, Nordhaus, who said that 4 degrees of warming was optimal for the planet. And it's absolute nonsense research. Like, it's been taken to pieces by Professor Steve Keen. It uses damage functions that no physical scientist would ever accept. Like, when it's got to a stage that a department has been captured by one discipline, and by the way, they call it a science, you know, Royal Economic Society, to promote economic science. It's not a science, that it's a discipline, right? There are 9 different schools in economics, and if you're an ecological economist, you're shoved in some other department. You're not even allowed to be like a proper, like, don't let that, should not be allowed. Like, there's some responsibility that's needed around naming this you know, part of so-called social science in that way is being used to justify the destruction of life on Earth. It's that bad. It's got a grip, and it's talking, you know, frankly, absolute fucking bullshit, and it's getting away with it. Where's the outrage? Like, if I was an economist, I'd be embarrassed about my profession. I have something to say about that. You've had economic students thankfully rising up and saying that, you know, this course is not useful. My son's thinking about studying it. I'm trying to, you know, inoculate him against the nonsense right now. So I think there's something very specific to do on campus, you know, and it could focus around the IPCC report 3 coming out and say, we don't trust that panel. I mean, you know, just to finish what the brilliant Professor Kevin Anderson from Manchester's Tyndall Centre said is, the only numbers you can trust these people with are page numbers. You know, don't let them on. That's what's being said about people within your profession, right? It's yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, just to say that you're very right to point all this out, and it's really important to focus on and keep on exposing just the. I mean, clearly economics is an absolutely main bastion of that needs to be sort of, or those types of economics. And I mean, Stephen Keen, Steve Hale, or Kate Raworth, there are lots of different kinds of economic ideas coming forward, but the dominant ones are still a huge problem. So yeah, thank you for saying all that. I think that's, and we should think in all other disciplines along these lines as well, but I think economics is definitely important to highlight. Thank you so much. There's been so much already, and as you've all seen, we've had lots of questions coming into the chat. So I will now just open the floor to the questions that people have been asking there, and which Sam has very helpfully been sending me on WhatsApp. So I will just start with the questions in chronological order as they've been coming in. I can't see the names of the people asking them. So the first question was to Gail about being the change. Maybe if you see yourself, well, I will ask the question, and apologies, I can't see who asked it, but the question to Gail about being the change. Affinity group sounds very interesting. Are there ways to learn more or be involved at this stage?
Yeah, thank you for the question and the interest. I did post in the chat channel a video where a group of us are sharing some visions and initial thoughts about that work. And there's a form where you can sort of stick your name in and let us know you're interested. So sorry, it's not more ready for people to sort of pile in, but what people could do immediately, really, I think, even as individuals, is think about what being the change means for you. I also made a suggestion in the chat channel for social scientists. There's a lawyer's pledge. It's asking lawyers that are concerned about climate crisis to make a pledge, and there's some details. Like I like the idea of oath, something that has a sort of spiritual depth to it. What would an oath from a social scientist mean? What would you say that you were willing to do and not do? Where's your yes and where's your no? That's a piece. I also think in these times where, you know, the system is designed to extract as much as possible from us and keep us stressed, that it's so important for us to learn together in our groups and as individuals about how to take care of ourselves. I genuinely think that it's a rebellious act to keep yourself well, to keep yourself functional. and to keep yourself in connection to something bigger than ourselves. I think that's to me, you know, that is a sort of right hemisphere connection, if you want to get neurological about it, but it's a spiritual piece, and we need to be in good shape, folks, for what's coming. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. No, that's very true. So just to make sure, so the second question is for Stellan and Sara. How do you find being both an academic and an activist? Should social scientists be worried about being accused of having an overly political agenda, losing their objectivity? How has this affected your careers, teaching, research, etc.? It's a very nice concrete question about the things we've been talking about, actually.
Can I start, Stella?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, yes.
So I don't know if we necessarily need to be objective. I find it extremely difficult to be objective. I almost always wear my ideology on my t-shirt or my jumper, even when I teach. So my students always know where I'm coming from. They don't necessarily need to agree. But I think our responsibility to our students is to help them learn how to critically analyze. So it's not about me imposing theory on them. It's about me helping them understand that they have agency, that they can reflect upon things. That's my baseline for, that's why I teach, that's why I'm an academic in the first place, because for me being an academic is being an activist. It's not one or the other, for me it's the same. Not all my students agree with me. I mean, when you teach social psychology, not everyone is going to agree, and I think that's perfectly fine, because I think it's through disagreements that we develop. So I don't think that losing objectivity is an issue. I also get asked this quite a lot in research, because I research certain groups that I'm comfortable hanging around, because most of my research is qualitative and you know, when I can afford it, ethnographic. So I couldn't immerse myself in a group that I do not ideologically agree with, because that would be dangerous and very difficult. So I do think that subjectivity can be a positive thing. I think that it's something we should have, you know, and use to our advantage. But yeah, I think social science very often is accused of, you know, being too political, too leftist, too ideological. But you know, they probably haven't been to our lectures. So I think just, you know, invite the critics. That's my suggestion. What do you think, Stellan?
Thank you, Sara. I very much agree. I mean, I think that the idea of being impartial or neutral as a social scientist is kind of a repressive mythology. It's really crap, actually. I mean, how would it be if a medicine researcher, a dentist, or any pediatrician would say, I'm only interested in sickness because it's interesting to learn about the body. I don't care if people die or not. That's not my concern. I just want to see how the cancer develops. That's utterly absurd. Obviously we need to be critical, but everyone needs to be critical. And if I could make a suggestion, I would say particularly the people that are politically aligned with the present system we live in, they need to be fucking critical. But the demand is on those that are activists or are queer or whatever. They need to be reflective. But I think particularly the people that are doing normal kind of political science or sociology, they need to be critical about why are they doing it like that. So I'm really critical to the whole idea, the whole ideology of impartiality or neutrality. That's one thing. The other thing is that I very much agree with Sara that I think our role is not to be like megaphones of activists. That's kind of meaningless. Activists are much better to speak for themselves. What we can do is to use our privilege of time and resources to have more like historical, geographical comparisons and reflections around contradictions and problems that exist within strategies and movements in order to suggest possible alternatives, not to tell people what to do, but to say, well, it's really impressive what you're doing. It has a couple of problems. There are some other people that did a similar kind of campaign and they did it in this and this way. Maybe you could reflect upon if that is a possibility. So, I mean, that's the kind of critical friends I think we as social scientists should be. And it frustrates me that a lot of my friends that have tenure are not adopting that kind of approach, but instead they are doing a more comfortable, radical work that is not challenging the system, a system that is designed to serve the capitalist system and the state.
Thank you. That's great. So question 3 is from Ben, and it's sorry, one second. It's how. Oh, hi, hello. How do you deal with? Yes, how do you deal with? Sorry, bad reading out here. But how do you deal with the serious difficulty of finding generalizable truths in social science? It's more and more recognized that social science results are usually uncertain because of the extraordinary complexity of systems involved. For example, positive and negative spillovers are both real. Doing something relatively unimportant like recycling could make you either more or less likely to do something more important like join collective action, depending on loads of things. So how can we use social science to generate the kind of confident, generalizable knowledge we need to guide useful action? Yeah, that's a big question, Ben. Thank you. Sorry, I read it out slightly badly here, but who would like to go first? But I think it's to everyone here. Or Ben, do you want to say something yourself briefly?
Yeah, I mean, this question paralyzes me as a social scientist trying to do useful things, like the replication crisis. Like, you know, I know that effects can go both ways. You know, like doing one thing could lead to being more likely to do something more useful, or it could be more likely that you're less likely to do it. And so if I want to advise what's the best thing to do, I so often have to say, you know what, my science is still in its infancy because we're dealing with the most complicated systems there are, like human individuals, human societies. We don't know. Like, it's so hard for social scientists to make confident predictions about what will happen if you do X, Y, or Z. So how do you deal with this uncertainty when you're trying to give advice to activists, to collective action?
So Ben, I would suggest that skip the idea of prediction and instead appreciate that for good and bad, human beings are self-reflective people that change their behavior when they get to know new things. So things are super complex, but I think we can still say something that is valid. And when we do systematic comparisons of cases, we can tease out a couple of things that matters, but we can't say it's exact this combination that in this context will lead to that result next year. So, but still we can say that things are more reasonable than other things if you're building on the experiences of how other people have done it. So I think it's kind of a middle range type of knowledge that is, if you want, like a toolbox of things that are useful to use, but you don't know the exact combination because it depends on the context and the dynamic of the struggle. So it's not worthless and it's not predictions, but I actually find that really reassuring because it means that people are not so easy to control. That's a frustration for authoritarian regimes, you know?
Yeah, so I mean, I agree. So as I might have mentioned, I'm a qualitative researcher, so I don't really do generalizations. Don't really do representative predictions either. So for me, it's about context. It's about mainly the social context, and each action, each movement, each event will be in a specific context. And I think that the starting point is different depending on the context, the social and the cultural context, and the consequences of each action or whatever will also be different depending on the social and cultural context. So even though when we work, we kind of see similarities in strategies, we see similarities in processes, we also see loads of variation in, I mean, if you just look at some of my research, we see that a lot of people that engage in environmental protests tend to change their consumption. So they change their shopping behavior or they change their diet. This we assume is similar if you engage in, for example, the Nazi movement, if you're get engaged in a neo-Nazi group. But we would not expect you to become vegan. We would not expect you to start buying things that aren't covered in plastic. But you would probably exclude certain labels because they are not aligning with your ideology. So even though we see that the processes and the strategies are often similar, there's huge variation in consequences and starting points. So I'm not sure how useful generalizations are, or always seeking a representative result either. So yeah, but I'm from a qualitative part of science.
Gail, did you want to?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're all getting kind of nerdy now, and I don't quite know the language here, so I'm not going to attempt to answer the question properly. But what does strike me is that we have to sort of learn from the other side and find our own version of what the other side are doing. And I just want to talk about one thing that's sort of on my mind at the minute. I'm talking to other people about it, so in case anybody can help with this. I think we're really super shit on the progressive left at propaganda, as far as I can see. And the Global Warming Policy Foundation have just rebranded themselves Net Zero Watch. You've got some deep pockets there, and you've got factories that spurt out memes and TikToks and whatever, and they're on it, and the story that net zero is a bad idea, that they're going to, how that propaganda machine, for example, managed to persuade everybody that we had to focus on benefit cheats and not on the bankers. And it's there doing its thing. And so I'm asking this kind of question, what does a propaganda factory for the progressive left, for the climate movement look like? Because, we're saying that people are reflective, but we also know that there's $650 billion roughly spent on advertising, and there's an awful lot of money goes into this behind the scenes social media focused weaponization. It looks to me, because I come from a working class family and what's going off in my family's WhatsApp, it looks to me that you have to make it funny, you have to make it have sex in it quite often, and hatred is used as a, you get to hate. So maybe we have to hate Wetiko and Urugu. I don't know, but or we have to point out the divide and conquer methodology of the system. Ian Hamming-Lopez's work seemed really important there, and I heard some research about evoking sort of space aliens before you asking people questions about racism, and then they were less racist. I don't know if you know the research I'm talking about, but to understand, like, how we're not, I don't see us as a climate movement communicating in particularly with working class people, and I think that's like a sort of key issue that one could focus on. And there may be other people that can help with that, but it's like, what's the research telling us about that? No, I wouldn't want to make the system itself worse by winning, you know, a thing, but I would want to be telling this story. You know, God, the energy prices are going up, but renewables aren't. They're getting cheaper. So, and all the sort of tax breaks for the fossil fuel companies. But how do you do that in a way that's funny? I don't know. You know, maybe don't ask nerds that, but you might know something about the communication techniques within that.
Actually, just Gail, just very briefly to add on your point there, I think that's very true, and I've just been finding it really interesting with a massive obviously we're not talking about it today as such, but obviously the massive war in Ukraine and the whole sort of using, you know, ride your bicycle, or if you drive your car, you drive with Putin, and those sort of things. Like, there's a whole moment now of different kinds of mobilization, and maybe something that we can also think about and tap into what is happening, actually, because so many, I mean, there are now, yeah, I don't want to go into it, but I think there's a lot there as well in terms of mobilization. But so the fourth question is from Jared, and it's for Sara. So Jared was asking that he likes what Sara was saying about how folk needing to perceive that their actions will have effect. So they're elegant solutions to the current crisis that are highly unpopular, but would immediately change behavior. For example, markets pricing products in a way that realistically reflect their carbon imprint. If I thought that engaging in collective action would bring about such a change tomorrow, I would. How does perceived efficacy in collective action happen?
Yeah, so again, it's about context. So for some, I don't know how international our audience is. Apologies if I make an example now that isn't globally inclusive. But insulate Britain, right? We would all benefit hugely from insulating houses, because it's absolute shite in this country. I'm not gonna lie, go to it. Pretty much any other country. And yeah, so I mean, that's a huge issue, and we should all be on board, right? Their tactics have been to occupy motorways, which have given them huge media coverage, which has empowered some people to take action. And it has raised the public awareness about the need of insulation. But it has also created disempowerment. So we always have to struggle with the empowerment versus disempowerment. And this will depend on, you know, how we identify. So is this something that I identify with? Do I feel like I am part of this movement? Do I feel like I am part of this group? And if we identify with it, we're more likely to be empowered by it. So I think when we were talking about earlier that we need to create an us, this is super important, but also super difficult, because we're going to struggle to find one us that fits everyone, because we're in such different contexts and we're in such different situations in our lives. But I do think that, you know, we can empower everyone. Some people will take a bit longer before they feel like, you know, this is efficient. This is something that I should do. So it will always depend on the context. It will depend on the action. It will depend on the group. It will depend on the target. I mean, even though I'm a huge believer in collective action. I'm a huge believer in boots on the ground. I'm a huge believer in the people. I mean, people power is hope for me. It's the future. It's, you know, screw the rest, to be honest. But does that empower me to do everything? No, it doesn't, because I don't believe that everything works. You know, but have I changed? Absolutely. I mean, I change all the time because I see other people take action. And that makes me feel, oh, if they can do it, then I can do it. So I think we need to remember that it's also not a static thing. It's something that actually changes. And we will change and, you know, find something that you believe in and show people that you take action, because if you take action, someone will believe in you and they will also take action.
Thank you, Sara. I will actually, since that was mostly addressed at you, let's actually just go on to the next question, which is actually, oh gosh, something happened here with I can't see them. Sorry, Sam, would you mind reading out? The fifth question is from Sara, and it's actually a very good question to kind of bring everything together again, and we can maybe talk a little bit more about. However, something has happened on my phone. I can only see half the message at the moment. So it's Sam. Would you be able to read that one out, or
yeah, I can do that. No problem.
Thank you.
Can you hear me clearly? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So yeah, there seems to be a general sense that mobilization isn't the right focus for now. As someone who chose mobilization over further study for this year, I'd love to know a bit more about where our enemies are thought to be best utilized. What is it social scientists can do this year to support Extinction Rebellion going forward?
Or maybe that's energies, possibly, but energies rather than enemies, possibly. But
yes, sorry.
Although
apologies. Yeah, I corrected another bit, but yeah, it's so where energies are best utilized. So just to reiterate, the last point in that was what is it social scientists can do this year to support Extinction Rebellion going forward? And this is someone who chose mobilization over for study for this year.
Yeah.
I think we can help find ways to make it more inclusive. So the more people can identify with the movement and with the actions, and through that also get empowered to take action.
Well, I was just to, Gail or Stellan, if you want to speak now.
Yeah, so let me connect this to the issue that Gail raised, and that was also mentioned in the chat about reaching out to the working class. I'm not an expert on framing and how to do the communication strategy, so I leave that to other people. But I know another thing, and that is that one of the key reasons why the landless workers movement in Brazil is the strongest in whole Latin America is because they're not just talking about a program of a change of society and revolution later on. They're not like a political party on the left saying vote on us and in 10 years there will be a paradise. Instead, they are trying to create something of a solution that is helpful for poor working class people here and now. So what they do is that they occupy land and create possibilities of creating organic farming, creating schools for their kids on the occupied land. So immediately when you occupy land, you create resources for the poor. But the thing is to connect these local occupations with a larger national and international struggle for changing the whole system. Right? So it's not just a local reform, but it's something that is connected to a larger thing, but it's very tangible. It's very kind of practical and material. And I think that is a key one, because in the middle class, we are tending to organize around changing policies and laws and making a change of society later on, because we have already a relatively comfortable lifestyle. Whereas people that are poor needs to have a solution for how to feed the family tomorrow. So I think it demands a whole other approach to social change, and it emphasizes direct action, construction of alternatives, and that's what I have been suggesting from the start.
Yeah, I've been in and around some of the occupations that have happened in the UK, and I don't know if that sort of Brazilian context works here. For example, there was Grow Heathrow that was both resisting the third runway and had a sort of a growing project, and I think part of the police crime courts and sentencing bill that's getting passed at the minute is an attack on occupations, actually, and in particular it's sort of leveraging the racism against traveller Romani peoples. I think it's really, really important, sort of food sovereignty and how that's done, and there's some great examples in Paul Hawken's book. So I'm not against it. I'm just not quite seeing that in the UK context as being the main thing to focus on. I mean, the things that happen in Stroud, where I'm based, are very polarised again. Sort of feeding people. Sort of alternative farming things compared to the estate I'm based in, where there's sort of a long table where people are being fed. Anyway, I'm also very aware of how, attacks, because we've got HS2 camps at the minute, we've had anti-fracking camps, how desperately difficult it is just holding those spaces together. So I'm not sure that's the constructive programme here in the UK. I just don't know. I do have a different thought, though, which is something that XR groups could do straight away, whether with their social science colleagues or not, which is around political change and changing the nature of politics. Well, at many different levels. It can be local, it can be regional. And this is the idea of the redemption of politics, because I've been talking quite a bit about oathing. I've been thinking, what is an oath for a politician that we need right now is we need to hear from politicians that are willing to be led by the people, if people have done deliberative democracy processes. So if you're in a local area, you could set up a process, and it might be an issue that is something that is challenging a lot of local people. I know in the Wirral, for example, it's not about car parking. It might be something else in Brighton. It might be something else in Stroud. But it's to actually go ahead and set up the process, and then to challenge politicians to sign the oath to say, you will do whatever this process says. And then we sort of, again, working class people, in my experience, most of us hate politicians because there's a despair. There's a sense that it's, no matter who you vote for, you get the same thing. I mean, I always talk about a neoliberal dictatorship. It's you're getting one version or another of the same old crap, right? So people just people may have seen the thing on Netflix. It was in the Black Mirror series, Vote Waldo. People just voted for a cartoon character. It's kind of what they've done with Boris, right? We just fucking vote for him because he's stupid, and then there's a hatred there that, again, is not being sort of jujitsu used, I think. So let's make politics, either you've said that you're going to support deliberative processes, or you're one of those shitty politicians that we all fucking hate. Sorry for the swearing, this is bad tonight, isn't it? You're one of those that we all hate. So, do you see what I mean? And I think that's something that people can do locally. And I think that's, just to go back to the original question, was about mobilizing. I think the point is, as I understand it, you mobilize from communities of connection. communities that are feeling empowered. And what's being tried at the minute, and I think was being tried with Insulate Britain, was just to straight mobilise into action. I think that's the sort of theory of change that Roger's trying to work on. I'm not seeing it being effective, actually, and I think that's why it was trying to extract from communities that already are in existence. So I think we can't skip that bit of organising, but actually it's important not to skip it, because where the organising can focus is on being the change, on doing the change work that needs to happen. So maybe to finish, what social scientists can think about together is, well, what is the relevant things that we can be doing in our communities that make sense here? You know, it's so good to learn from and be inspired by the radicals in the global south, in Brazil, and it may or may not translate here, but at least it's you know, juice for the excitement. Thank you.
Thank you, Sara.
Can I just add something?
If I may just very briefly add, Sara, I think it's not, you mustn't feel that it's a waste of time now to be spending a year doing activism, because even if it's other people are at different points in what they think is important, you've learned so much from doing it, and you have your own, I mean, it's really, it's a good thing to do at any stage. And frankly, I believe you have to do all kinds of activism all the time anyway, or all of us have to do all kinds of activism all the time. And Gail, just very briefly, it's actually for me quite interesting, because I come to this, I've only just joined Extinction Rebellion, but I was really, for the last 3 years, I've been working with the local council here in Eastbourne, and yeah, so I have a lot of experience of trying to do things like get a new cycle path, or trying to plant trees. And so at this moment, personally at this moment, I'm like, I just want to protest and do direct action. I've had completely enough of running into provincial mentalities. And what you were saying, by the way, about the working class people, I am surrounded here by middle class people who, and honestly, for me, the sort of closed mindset of everyone has a dog, everyone has an SUV, everyone goes on holidays, and everyone just focuses on their children and what school they get into, and that the children do well, and they do not, nobody thinks beyond. And it's really, that's sort of I'm completely how to get people to think see the bigger picture, which, by the way, also applies to academics, because we're so used to in academia to have your own turf and to not think about the bigger picture, which I realize all of you here are doing. But so yeah, sorry, just Sara, just to say it's not a waste of time to do what you're doing now. Sorry, that was quite long, and we're actually, no, we still have a little bit of time. There's from Hannah, there's a...
Just jump in on what you were saying about it's definitely not a waste of time. I mean, my whole PhD, which took me almost 6 years for lots of reasons, one being in the forest, but actually shows that it's not a waste of time. It has great benefits for you. It can actually make your physical health better. It can make your mental health better. So it's never, ever, you know, a bad idea. But I think also what we need to, because Charlie raised this in the chat, Charlie Gardner, because we talked quite a lot about how to get people to engage and why people engage. But rightly, as Charlie says, we can actually help with why people don't engage. Because I would guess that most of you here today, we could get to engage, or you're already engaged. So we actually need to reach the people that aren't here today. And I think we can make a huge contribution there. And I know that there are some people here in the audience actually doing research on this. And I know that there's some really exciting projects from people not here as well coming out. Unfortunately, academia is so bloody slow. So it probably won't be for another year or so. But I do think that we need to put our focus on the 99%. Although all of you are fantastic and amazing people, and thank you for being here. But I think we need to put our efforts on the people that aren't here.
Thank you. Yes. Actually, the next question is also a really good sort of overall question from Hannah, and it's I'll just read it out. In my experience, there seems to be an opposition between direct action addressing structures of oppression in society, and more reflective action undoing internalized structures of oppression. Do you think these are necessarily opposed? I think that's a very nice overall question for the panel, maybe as a sort of final question. I realized there were other comments but in the chat, but I haven't been able to keep up with it. So let's end on this sort of idea of the dialectics between addressing sort of external structures of oppression and internalized ones through sort of internal restructuring. Stellan, do you want to?
I can begin and save time by saying that I already replied in the chat.
You applied in what? Sorry. Oh, you replied in the chat. Oh, I see. Sorry, I'm so behind with the chat. I can't. I haven't been able to catch up with it. Okay. Okay.
And I kind of agree with Stellan's reply. I don't think that they're necessarily opposed to each other, but I do think that they have different aims and different uses, and probably different members as well.
I'm just going to think out loud, if that's okay. My dear colleague Skeena, who bless her lost her mum today, has been working with others who I know are here on the concept of co-liberation, and I think there's something about how we integrate our deepest desires for liberation together, and when we're talking about structures of oppression and how they show up in and amongst us, are we sort of pulling each other apart for what we're getting it wrong, or are we understanding that my liberation and yours are utterly connected? And I have a strong sense that the change comes when we see each other's struggles as so deeply interlinked that there's a self-liberation within that. I often want to sort of share with men how it looks to me, how the patriarchy is so brutal to men and how little that's spoken about, and so for me as a feminist, like it's what seems to happen with men is sorry for the generalization, right? I mean, I know, obviously, but I find it really painful to see, like, do you take away the power of healing from people on some levels, at least, obviously depending on any individual's journey. And so like, as a woman who had a sort of working class background, my personal liberation has been not that complex, still hard work, but it's like you have to think you're worth something, because that's the message. Like, you're a woman and you're working class, you should be like cleaning up somewhere. It's a sort of straightforward direction of movement, right? And then for men, you're sort of told, like, well, you're bad and you're better than everybody else, but you have to be successful. But successful is these things, not some things that you might want to do. And it's not about you, it's about what you produce. And how are you supposed to recover from that? And by the way, you're not supposed to be together with other men in connection. Like, so to me, there's just such a deep way of, I know this is very personalized, and I know structures of oppression are baked into the systems. I'm not just going on the personal, but there's something about having these deep connections from a place of love about how these systems are showing up in each other and how we can work together, because brother, and the other siblings, right? I know there's more than one gender, but it's a precious thing when we can be together to talk through these things and not see them as separate. I think there's an integration needed.
Thank you. No, that's I think there are a few more things in the chat, but I'm sort of, I think we are actually kind of coming to the end. Sam, is there anything? Sorry, I really haven't been able to follow the chat. So Sam.
I was just going to suggest, I mean, if there's just a minute what might be a nice thing to do is just ask for everyone's hope for the future, just really briefly. Because I guess, I mean, that's the reason why we're meeting, essentially, is to try and motivate more action. So if, I don't know if that's being a bit cheeky, but I'm going to put that out there as a potential and finishing question, if that's okay. And thanks again for everyone joining, by the way. It was brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, the same from me. So if just some final words maybe on hopes for the future in the in the immediate and medium and long term future, I guess. So I don't know. Sara or Gail, would you want to?
Sure. So my hope for the future, small scale hope, is that everyone here today does a kind of an act of kindness, maybe, and just starts a positive chain of actions that are good for you and good for others. I have lots of hope, especially in the younger generations that aren't just standing by and aligning themselves with the capitalist system. So I do think that there's lots of hope for the future, and my hope is that we keep being visible on the streets.
Yeah, I want to suggest a vision that is again built on the landless workers in Brazil, but not because we want to copy exactly that into UK or Sweden or United States. Obviously, contexts are different, but my vision is this. Outside Sao Paulo, since 10 years, there exists an activist university created by a social movement. Academics and activists work together to educate a new generation of activists. They're building a knowledge that I think is kind of the future. We need to institutionalize that kind of collaboration, and I think we can learn from their experience. We are up for something that is urgent, but it's also bloody long-term, because we are up against powers that are so incredibly entrenched. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been an amazing discussion.
Oh, thank you. And just like love and gratitude and good luck to the social scientists who are going to get together and think together. And what brings me hope is the thinking of this as a beautiful dance and a game that we play together. I don't think you defeat Urugu, Wetiko and the Hungry Ghost and whatever else we want to call it through the push energy, through the fighting energy, even though sometimes we need to call in our warrior spirits. I think there's, I call it magic sauce, like ketchup, right, tomato sauce, but it's magic sauce that we create together. And it's got a few ingredients in it. It's got a sense of agency. It's got a sense of justice or the meeting of people's needs. It's got love, of course, and it's got playfulness and it's got wisdom in it. And we find spaces where we create that together and we play, we have a laugh, we have fun together, and we make connection. And what underneath that is really the human spirit. And this system is, I don't believe I live in a culture, I believe I live in a disease, and I'm ready to get better. And I think so many of us are, and we're just working this out. Like, what a time to be alive, right? I mean, I know many of us are suffering, but it's so interesting, it's so exciting. It's a time to be curious. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. I have to say that it's been really wonderful to hear you three talking and thinking all this, and as well as all the, it's so clear that everyone has been really engaged and thinking and coming up with lots of connections and emotions and thoughts. So and thank you. Yeah. So I think Sam probably or Catherine, if you would like to just kind of bring it all to a complete close, but thank you for all your contributions, and to Sam and Catherine and Ben for setting all this up. And we really look forward to seeing as many of you as possible joining XR Social Scientists and continuing these conversations.